Hello, I'm Richard Murphy, and I want to do a slightly different YouTube video from those that I usually produce, because I've been asked by some politicians to suggest how they should answer the question that they always fear when being interviewed on economics, and that is, how would you deal with the mountain of COVID debt? Well, to deal with this, I'm going to do something a little different because I've actually written out a suggested radio interview. And I'm going to effectively read that into this. But because it's meant to be a radio interview, frankly, you don't need the pictures from here on. This is meant to be what I think might happen on Radio 4 in my fantasy that a politician might answer the questions of the type that a Radio 4 presenter often asks on this type of issue in the way that I'd like. So, here we go. Interviewer. Let's face reality here. The country is more than $2 trillion in debt, and this has got to be repaid. What would you do about it? Politician. I'm sorry to say that I do not agree with the arguments implicit in your question, and I need to explain why. First, the country has not got more than $2 trillion in debt. The government has bought back around £800 billion worth of its own debt. Quantitative easing has cancelled that debt. In 11 years, not a single penny's worth of the repurchased debt has ever been sold back to the financial markets. So, just like a mortgage that has been paid off has been cancelled, so has this government debt been cancelled. In that case, I'm not sure why you want me to explain how to repay government debt that's already been repaid. Your question doesn't make sense unless you're asking me how we would want to repay that debt twice. And I'm not sure why you'd want us to do that. Second, you say that the government debt must be repaid, but the fact is that people are still queuing up to buy government debt. So, you need to explain to me why it is that the government wants to repay debt that people are desperate to buy. Again, I'm not sure that I understand the reason for your question. Third, if you're asking me how we could cancel the electronic money that's been used to buy the debt, again, I'm not sure why you would want to do that either. The money in question, or about £800 billion in total, is what now provides our financial system with the stability it needs. We could force that money out of existence, but we'd destabilise the entire banking system if we did. Is that what you want? And why? Do you want another financial crisis? Interviewer. But everyone knows that we cannot afford this debt. The Chancellor is already warning that if interest costs go up by 1%, then the cost of government debt will increase by £25 billion. How can you not worry about that? Politician. Again, your question does not really make a lot of sense, and I'm going to have to explain why. First, let's look at the £25 billion. Of that sum, at least a third, and maybe a half by the end of this Parliament, will be the interest that is still being paid on the government debts that the government has itself repurchased using quantitative easing, but which the government still claims exists to frighten us with numbers like this. So I suggest that half that £25 billion of interest will come back to the government straight away. The real cost is just £13 billion in that case. And that £13 billion will partly be covered by tax paid. On average, let's use 20% or so and say around £3 billion of tax will be paid. We're down to £10 billion now. Does that sound quite so painful? I thought not. If we get the numbers right, they're nothing like what the Chancellor is suggesting. Then remember that most government debt is fixed term, and so on average it will take up to 14 years for some of it to see the interest rate change work through into the market. In other words, this cost will not actually arise for a very long time, if it ever does, because there'll be other interest rate changes in the meantime. After which, recall that the interest rates are now almost entirely under the control of the government because of QE. The bad old days when markets ruled rates are long gone. So the question is, why would the government want to increase rates? It's not what happens if they increase, it's why would the government want to or let them increase? I wouldn't want that rate increase, so I'm not sure why I need to justify the cost of something I wouldn't do. Interviewer. But come on, Surely you agree that we can't go on like this. There is no magic money tree. We just can't keep adding to the debt, can we? Politician, sorry to say, but again, your questions don't make a lot of sense. First, the national debt in the UK started in 1694, and as a matter of fact, it's increased pretty steadily ever since then. So it would seem that for 325 years, we have continued on this path, and I'm not sure now why 327 years after the start of the national debt and a year or two after the start of the COVID crisis, we can't carry on as we have been. Your question simply doesn't make sense. Second, there very obviously is a magic money tree. What we now know is that the Bank of England can create money on demand. That's always been true, but now we have seen it, and we can't ever pretend that it doesn't happen again. Why do you ask me to believe what is obviously not true in that case? Third, we know Japan has created more than 200% of its GDP in QE and is still doing very nicely despite that. So what the limit is in the case of the UK is not known, but we clearly have some very long way to go as yet. Fourth, we now know that the government can take almost complete control of interest rates in our economy. It's done so for more than a decade. Real interest costs of the government have fallen as a result quite considerably, despite the increase in apparent notional debt over that period. So, therefore, why are we getting worked up about interest now? Fifth, because the government now knows it can use fiscal policy, monetary policy, and QE to control inflation, the risk of that is also very low indeed. Current paranoia is that we might reach the target rate of inflation of 2% if things continue as they are. That is not things spinning out of control. So sixth, I can't see any reason why we can't carry on the way that we are. Interviewer, you can say all that, but the Treasury, the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility all disagree with you. So why are they right and why are you wrong? First of all, this is the politician speaking, first of all, the IMF, the World Bank and the OECD would all say that the Treasury, the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility are wrong right now. I think you should ask why our public economists are arguing with the weight of world opinion at the moment, because that's what they're doing. Second, the reason why they're wrong is that our public economists are still yearning for the old economics that they were taught back in their days at Oxford or wherever. The nice mathematical models that they learned then that told them that markets were always right and governments were always wrong may have looked good on their professors' blackboards, but that did not mean that they were right. Third, we know that those old economics models were wrong. A decade of austerity that left us wholly unprepared for the shock of COVID and left millions impoverished and without the services they need proved that. And the private sector did not deliver much growth either in that period. If anything, it carried on destroying the planet whilst making the country more unequal. Fourth, we know that the economic textbooks are also wrong. The Bank of England said this in 2014 when they admitted that banks not only could make money out of thin air, but to actually make all the money that we use in the entire economy in that way, excepting notes and coins, which are a tiny part of the overall total. But having done so, the Bank of England now refuses to take heed of its own advice and sticks to out-of-date dogma. Fifth, there is of course politics in all this. Tory governments want a small state. They will say whatever is required to deliver it, whether it's right or wrong. And sixth, we need a bigger state than they suggest appropriate. That does not make me wrong. It means I have a different opinion, and one that I think most people in this country would agree with. Interviewer. So we're back to socialism then? Politician. It's interesting you think we've had socialism, because I don't recall that, nor is it what I'm calling for now. I'm arguing for a mixed economy where state and private sectors each do what they're best at. I think that dividing line is currently drawn in the wrong place. I think the state should do more and outsourcers should do less, for example. The success of the truly NHS vaccination programme, as opposed to the private sector track and trace programme, is, I suggest, clear evidence of that. But that does not mean I'm suggesting socialism. I want to build a partnership to create a transition to a full employment sustainable economy. That is what we have to have. That is what is possible. But it is impossible if we try to crash the economy by repaying the national debt when it has already been paid, or by trying to crash the banks by withdrawing the funding that they now rely upon to make the financial system work. Recessions do not create investment and change, which is what we need. Recessions create stagnation. Since private money is not creating that investment and change, right now I'm suggesting that the state should do so instead. So, finally, a question for you, interviewer. Do you want me to promote a recession or stagnation, as your questions imply, or do you want me to promote sustainable jobs and growth, as I want? Is there even a choice to make? So why are you asking the questions that you do? Why not change the agenda to one that is appropriate for the times? Your listeners might thank you. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in what I've been saying in this video, please subscribe. There is a button below the viewing screen. If you're interested in what I have to say on Twitter, I'm at Richard J. Murphy on that medium. If you want to look at my blog, that's taxresearch.org.uk, and we have a Facebook page as well, Richard J. Murphy. So one of those things will get you more information on what this video series is about, and I hope I'll see you again soon.